Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Babette Francis. Welcome, Babette.
Hi, Gavin.
Now, you and I have something very small in common. My Anglo-Indian in-laws came from Lucknow.
That's fascinating because that's where I was born.
So in all these years, I've not met another person. So thank you for making my mind whiz around to India and some of the stories we heard.
Well, you have now, so I hope I've made your day.
You have indeed. So you have a wonderfully large family. How many children do you have?
I'm blessed. Yes, I have 8 children, yes. 20 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren.
Wow. Well, that keeps you young.
Absolutely. No, there is a scientific basis for that, actually, because they say every time you have a baby, some of the baby's cells remain in your circulation and they protect you from, other ills and infirmities. So,
well, that's something that I hadn't heard. In fact, we've got some good news for any young women out there who perhaps are watching the show, and that is the positive side of having a child. What's the story there?
Well, a lot of the pro-abortion side presents it as a disaster if a young girl becomes pregnant. But in fact, it's good for her health because the female body was designed to have babies shortly after puberty. And having a baby under the age of 20 protects you against breast cancer, which is one of the major killers of women premenopausal and the third major killer of women postmenopausal. So it's a very positive thing to have a baby. The baby is good for you. Wow.
And there's a few more statistics out there that say that if you have a number of children, it's more beneficial.
It is absolutely. There's a research study from New South Wales, which we've quoted in one of our newsletters. And this was back from the 30s, before we had antibiotics and a lot of life-saving procedures. And it showed that women who had 6 children lived longer than those who had 3, and the ones who had 3 lived longer than the ones who had 2 or 1, and the ones who were childless had the shortest life expectancy. So really, having babies is very good for you.
Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. And in fact, perhaps if some people bothered to read all of the fine print on medication, contraceptive medication, they might find that there's a really fine print there somewhere if they just bother reading it.
Yes, well, for example, on the packets of the pill, the contraceptive pill, there's a warning that it increases the risk of breast cancer. I just wonder how many women bother to read that, because the incidence of breast cancer has risen enormously in Australia and in Western countries, and now it's starting to increase in the third world, where it was, virtually very rare.
Wow.
And this is all because of population control programs and the promotion of hormonal contraception.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad.
Okay, now there's another interesting kind of spin-off here with partaking the contraceptive, and that is our waterways are being affected by increased what?
Yes, I think the excretion of estrogen into the waterways is causing. They say it's causing some of the fish to change sex, which is quite alarming, because apparently there's really no effective way of filtering hormones from water. You can filter particles of stuff, and I think some pesticides, but it's difficult to filter hormones.
Wow! And so the fish are not breeding as well and prolonged as they have been.
And I'm sure this is having effect on the male of the human species as well. I think they're becoming a bit intimidated or feminized by women claiming, to be powerful all the time and, wanting to dominate everything.
Well, that's an interesting thought there to reflect on. Actually do our own research. The internet is an amazing device to find out information, but to find out both sides of any story.
Yes, it's a pity that only one side is. There's a tremendous amount of censorship in the media of the pro-life side, and it's frustrating the way we find abortion is presented as a solution to women's problems when it's not. When a woman has an abortion, she's losing one of the most precious assets in her life, because she may have a temporary problem with finance or education or accommodation, but 20 years down the track, she's lost somebody who would have loved her and whom she would have loved and would be far more important to her than even than a university degree or something like that.
Now, talking about going to university, you have a science degree.
Yes, I have, and I was going to add to my previous comment that having a baby is not incompatible with having a university degree. You know, you just have to manage things more efficiently.
Yeah. So tell me some of the stories out of that managing from your life.
Well, I've been very fortunate because I had my children after I was married, and that's something I'd recommend. A lot of young people do things the wrong way. You know, they sometimes sleep together and then get to know each other and then maybe and become pregnant, and then maybe they'll consider marriage. It should be the other way around. They should get to know each other, get married, and then have the baby.
Yes, yes. Now, how many grandchildren again do you have?
I've got 20.
20?
Yes.
Wow. And I guess at Christmas time, that's a pretty big gathering?
It is a very big gathering. Our immediate family numbers 42, I think, you know, counting me. So that's before we even invite anyone else. That's, you know, that's our immediate family.
Now, what personal research and writings have you made?
I've done a lot of reading on the issue of the increased risk of breast cancer caused by induced abortion. And in fact, at the moment, I'm having an argument with the Medical Journal of Australia because they published what we regard as an invalid study. It was published in the form of a letter to the editor. We haven't actually got the details of the study. But in this letter to the editor, the authors claim that induced abortion didn't increase the risk of breast cancer. But what was clear was in their study, they'd included both ordinary miscarriages, spontaneous miscarriages, and induced abortion. Well, those are two completely different biological facts because in a miscarriage, the hormones usually don't rise sufficiently to increase the number of immature breast cells in the woman's breast. Whereas in an induced abortion of a healthy pregnancy, the breast cells have increased. These are immature breast cells, and therefore the woman is more vulnerable to breast cancer. These cells don't mature until the 32nd week of pregnancy, of a normal pregnancy. So when she's pregnant with a healthy pregnancy and it's aborted at 11 weeks, she's got more of those immature breast cells in her breasts than before the pregnancy.
Wow.
And so that increases her risk of breast cancer.
Well, thank you for informing us of that. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Babette Francis. Babette, we were just looking at some letters to the editor and how they've mixed some facts up here. They haven't compared oranges with oranges.
Yes, it's quite outrageous because we've always emphasized in our articles and the research that miscarriage is totally different in its biological effect on the woman's breasts compared to an induced abortion. In a normal miscarriage, the woman miscarries probably because the hormones have not risen sufficiently or there's some defect in the fetus. But in any case, the hormones have not risen enough to cause an increase in the number of her breast cells. Whereas in induced abortion of a healthy pregnancy, these immature cells have increased and they're the ones that are vulnerable to cancer. This is why childless women have a much greater risk of breast cancer than a woman who's had children, because a childless woman has these immature breast cells which have never matured, after a 32 weeks pregnancy.
Yes, and you're able to take some of this content, this research, to the United Nations. What's the big picture here? Tell me about it.
Well, the United Nations is obsessed with the idea that the world is overpopulated and that we have to reduce population, and they're attempting to do this by fair means or foul, mostly foul. As a non-government organization which has accreditation with the Economic and Social Council of the UN, we're entitled to attend UN conferences as observers and also to organize non-government organization, what they call parallel events, which run concurrently with the UN session. So every year we go to New York in March, and we organize a parallel event on women's reproductive health, and we present the data on the risks of increased risk of breast cancer caused by an induced abortion. So we try to educate the women of the third world in particular, who are very innocent and ignorant of this information.
But then maybe there's young women watching this show tonight, and aren't first world women also not informed?
We've tried to inform them, but unfortunately the cancer councils in most Western countries just refuse to acknowledge the risk, and they present, as I said, spurious studies like this one quoted in the letter to the Medical Journal of Australia, where they mix up spontaneous miscarriages with induced abortion, and those are two completely different biological effects, events. And so we try to counter this. And as I said, I'm having an argument with the Medical Journal of Australia right now. And I've also raised this issue with the Health Minister, with Peter Dutton, because quite apart from this spurious study and the Australian study, there have been over 10 Indian studies that have come out showing the increased risk of breast cancer caused by abortion. There are studies from Turkey, Iran, China, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, all showing an increased risk of breast cancer caused by abortion, which is being heavily promoted by the United Nations Fund for Population Activities. The one from China is very interesting. It's by Huang and others, and it shows not only the increased risk of breast cancer, but also what's called the dose effect. In other words, the greater the number of abortions the woman had, the greater her risk of breast cancer. It was almost 84% for a woman who'd had 3 or more abortions. You know, so
how interesting.
Very significant.
So these articles are published and
absolutely
available?
Published. And you know the silly excuse that insulting excuse that the cancer organizations use? They say that these studies from Asia and other places showing the increased risk are subject to what they call recall bias. And what recall bias means is that a woman who's got breast cancer will tell the truth about her past medical history, including her abortions, because she's frightened for her life, so she tells the truth. Whereas a healthy woman will tell lies about her previous abortions if she's had any, or she will forget about them. Now that's just insulting to women, you know, assuming that healthy women routinely lie on questionnaires about their past medical history, or that they forget. How could you forget an abortion that you've had, you know?
So is this a biased group of men in scientific realms who put these spurious statements out?
It's not just men. I'd say the women are even worse. You know, there's one woman researcher with the National Cancer Institute in America. That's a premier cancer organization in the world. Her name is Louise Brinton. And she's actually signed off on one of the studies by Dolly, I think, that showed the increased risk of breast cancer. She signed it as a second researcher or something. But when she's questioned about the media about this and said, you signed off on the study, how does the National Cancer Institute, where you're a researcher, how does it continue to deny this link? She refuses to comment. You know, this is the level of, culpability.
Yes.
Of denial.
Yes. All right, so let's come back to this denial. What's happening in Australia, maybe Victoria, where there's this denial regarding the truth and the research that's in place?
Well, we're trying to get the facts out, and as I said, I've written to the Health Minister, I've written to the Prime Minister, and to the cancer organizations, and to the Medical Journal of Australia. Ultimately, the truth can't be hidden. It's going to emerge somewhere. This Chinese study is too explosive to be just dismissed with, the charge of recall bias, because in China the abortion is compulsory after one pregnancy, so there's no possibility of recall bias. It's all there on the record, and the women have got no reason to conceal their past history or to forget about it.
Now, if there are any young women who are experiencing unexpected pregnancy at the moment, how can they be encouraged with what information to continue that pregnancy?
Well, we don't want to just frighten them about breast cancer. What we want to tell them is that life you're carrying is one of your most precious assets, and whatever difficulties you have now of finance or accommodation or education, it's only a temporary difficulty. 20 years down the track, you'll have somebody who you can love and who will love you. So don't mislay that life. That's their most precious possession.
Thank you, Babette. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Babette Francis. Babette, we are talking about we a lot, and you're involved with which organisation?
I'm the National and Overseas Coordinator of Endeavour Forum, which is a Christian pro-life, pro-family women's organisation. And the overseas part refers to our work at the UN.
And we've touched on some of that UN experience that you've had.
Yes.
How many delegates go there from Australia?
Well, it's usually just me and one other because it's a very expensive business flying to America, and the hotel accommodation is exorbitant as well. But I've got associated teams from Canada and the United States who come and help me with the work there. So we're entitled to have 20 observers altogether, so, to register 20 people for attendance. So they're mostly Americans and Canadians who come and join me.
Well, we need to do some fundraising to get some more Aussies over there.
I'd be delighted, Gavin. Anything you can contribute.
All right. Now, coming back to some evidences of how we can encourage women to consider their pregnancy.
I think one of the best ways of encouraging them is to enable them to see their babies on ultrasound. They're really beautiful pictures, to see your baby moving around and sucking his or her thumb, or often smiling and hiccuping. It's really a lovely sight. And this shows the anti-academic bias of the other side, because they try to prevent women from seeing their babies on ultrasound. They oppose this. They oppose any legislation requiring the aborting doctor to show the woman, her baby on ultrasound. In any other surgical procedure, it would be medical negligence for the doctor not to allow you to see the knee he's operating on or the hip he's operating on. In fact, they make you watch a video of the operating procedure and see to show exactly what they're going to do. But with an abortion, they try to prevent you from seeing it. In fact, one of the abortion manuals said when doing an ultrasound to estimate the age of the fetus, turn the screen away from the patient so that she can't see the baby. This is so wicked. And feminists just oppose this, and I cannot understand what goes through their heads to stop women seeing what is a live photo of her baby. Yes,
and of course you can get it in colour and 3D at the moment.
Absolutely. And the other thing that can't be shown is, on television they show whales being slaughtered and seals being clubbed, but why won't they show what's done in an abortion? The baby being shredded limb from limb, the brains being suctioned out, the baby literally being ripped apart in pieces. If they showed that would be really inform mothers and the public of just what an induced abortion is.
So we can be very excited about animal rights, but not so excited about the right of this child.
Yes. One of my favorite pro-life cartoons is of a little baby seal holding up a placard and saying, "Can you believe they won't show this about, human babies?" These are the hapless seals that are sometimes clubbed to death in countries in Canada and Alaska and places like that.
Yeah, indeed, we can raise the emotional stakes, can't we, by just showing what is taking place.
Yes.
Wow. All right, let's come back to a broader lot of issues that you're involved in. So we have Right to Life, a voice for
One of the misconceptions is that, misconceptions, interesting word, is that in this context is that the world is overpopulated. In fact, about half the countries in the world are suffering from what's called population decline. Their replacement level their birth rate is below replacement level. And countries that are really alarmed about this are countries like Russia and Japan. I recently come back from a pro-life conference in Moscow, And the conference was entitled Large Families and the Future of Humanity. And they're promoting large families for all they're worth in both the government and the churches and the pro-life organizations, because Russia is losing about 1 million of inhabitants every year, 1 million of population every year. Their population is declining, and they're having great difficulty in arresting this decline. And the same is true for Europe. In Europe, the population is not yet declining because they've got vast immigration, but their natural birth rate is well below replacement level. And the same is true in countries like Portugal and Spain and Japan. In Japan, in certain villages, there are no more young children. You know, it's very sad. And the old people are clutching, robot babies or cuddly toys or something, because there are no more babies.
My goodness.
It's quite frightening, and it's amazing how the UN hasn't caught up with this demographic, what they call demographic winter.
Yes. Okay, so what about Australia? What's its demographic
winter?
Well,
our birth rate is also below replacement level. It's 1.7, I think, at the moment. But we're sort of protected because there's a tremendous demand for immigration into this country. You know, there are more people who want to come to Australia than we can, that we're able to accept, economically able to accept. So that's a protection for us. But I still think it's better to have a native-grown population than, immigrants, some of whom may fit in, and others who may have difficulty adjusting to life here.
Yes. Let's come back to the scans for a moment, the ultrasounds and scans. If a young woman finds herself with a child who's not quite what you'd call perfect, what do we say to that young woman to encourage her to continue with the pregnancy?
Well, I think the first thing is that there could be a mistake on the scan. A lot of women have received difficult diagnoses, and they've been in error, so the scan may be wrong. So let's wait and see. That's one thing. But the other thing, even if the scan is accurate, we don't kill people who have disabilities after birth. So what's the issue? How do we kill them before birth? And many of the things that women are warned about are minor defects, like a cleft palate, for example, which can be fixed up. And even the more serious ones, like a diagnosis of Down syndrome. Those children are very happy children, very loving children, and the parents who have them say that it's been a wonderful blessing to their family. It's brought the family together. It's taught them a lot of virtues like patience and kindness and the simple joy, because these children they're the truly innocents of the world. They are basically happy and loving and affectionate, and the parents have found that they added a dimension to their families.
Thank you, Babette, for that joyous ending. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.